Plain Truth. I'm your host, Plain, and each week we like to go into some of the mysteries, anomalies, and dirty underbelly of the world around us. And this week we have a special guest, Turd Ferguson. Turd, are you there?
I sure am, Plain.
Oh, thanks for coming. And along for the ride is Oolong Rabbit. Oolong, you there?
I'm here. Hi, Turd.
Hi, Oolong.
Time to get going. So, Turd, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your website, what you've been working on lately?
Well, my journey has been a rather bizarre one in that my claim to fame is, frankly, just being a regular guy. But I've traded options and futures for more than half of my adult life at this point, going back to about 1987. Excuse me, and I have a little cold, so I apologize. And I guess somewhere around 2008 or 9, I kind of had my grand awakening, as did most everybody that was paying any attention at that time financially. And I got involved with a site as it was just kind of beginning called Zero Hedge. A lot of people know zerohedge.com now, and kind of gained a bit of a reputation there as a precious metals trading expert. And people asked me to start my own site. And so I did, and it just rapidly took off. We started on Blogspot for free, and then within about 6 months, I had to build a dedicated site, and it can be found now at TF for Turd Ferguson, tfmetalsreport.com, all one word. We have a very vibrant online community where the number one rule is the golden rule. You want to treat everybody the way that you want to be treated. So it's a little different and hopefully a little more polite, a little nicer place than your average internet message board. There also is a subscription component where I do daily podcast summaries, and we do webinars every week with some of the biggest names in metals. If you want that deeper access, it's a big whopping $10 a month to join there. So it's not a backbreaker or a bank breaker, but there are a couple different services obviously within the site. But again, it's all at tfmetalsreport.com. So thank you for letting me plug that, Plain.
Oh, you're welcome. So I guess things are looking pretty good these days, right? Washington, D.C. is back to getting things done. And I mean, I guess the economy is looking good, right?
Okay, I could go on for quite some time with that one if you'd like. Why don't we just start with things are getting back to normal in Washington, D.C. There's something really significant that took place that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. And maybe they've noticed, maybe they haven't, but instead of a hard and fast numerical dollar amount debt limit increase this time, the debt ceiling has just been waived. And now we are operating under a debt ceiling that just simply expires at a date certain in the future. The date they picked this time was February the 7th. They've done that for plainly political reasons. It was clear that the anger of the country was building against all politicians in Washington. And they knew that if they came back, if they asked for $600 billion in debt ceiling increase, and then turned around and came back in just 4 months saying, well, hey, we hit that already. Now we need to do this again. People would actually start to figure out how desperate and how terrible things are. So instead of that, they said, we'll just structure this a little differently now. We're going to kind of just give it a date where the president has to come back or Congress has to authorize spending again. That date this time is February the 7th. I would imagine after February the 7th, the new date will be sometime in December after the 2014 elections. But this is very important stuff that I hope people understand, because no longer are these negotiations bound by a number. They'll just simply be bound by a date in time. That precedent now is set, and I'm confident that's the way it will be going forward.
Well, that's something to chew on. But I mean, aren't we kind of in a sense past the stage of the Constitution or laws or whatever really mattering?
Well, certainly, but again, this is symptomatic, or what's the word I'm looking for? Symbolic, whatever, of how they're operating lawlessly, because this debt ceiling has been law. I mean, it was originally put in place, whatever it was, 25, 30 years ago, and now rather than continuing to operate with that as some type of and it's just silly that it would even be a framework because all they do is raise it, obviously. But at least there was this semblance of, well, we have to stay below this level and we can never go past there. Now, I mean, that's just gone. And see ever since May 17th of this year, people, and again, this may not be news to people that have been paying attention, but since May 17th this year, the accumulated debt of the U.S. has been stuck at about $16.9 trillion. And the reason it was stuck is because we were up against that last debt ceiling raise. And the only reason the government was able to keep going is the Treasury Secretary, this fellow Lou, was able to borrow some money from this department or borrow some money from this fund, trust fund or whatever, and kind of parsed money out of a certain pension account over there and was able to kind of tap all these different pots of money to fund the deficit spending for the last 5 months. The reason they couldn't come right back with a $600 billion new debt ceiling raise was because today, as soon as the government reopened, all of that money that was borrowed in the last from all these other internal buckets within the government, all that money had to be repaid today. And so the debt today went up by $328 billion today.
It sounds like they've been kicking the can down the road for quite a while, Turd. Is there any road left to kick it down at this point?
That's part of this change too, because my grandmother always told me, if you're going to have credit cards, pay those damn things off as quick as you can, because she understood the law of compounding interest, right? I mean, if you're the creditor, it works in your favor, right? It's a pretty good deal. But if you're the debtor, if you're the one on the hook for that credit card, it'll eat you alive in time. And that's what we're up against now. The interest is compounding so quickly, and that's all part of why quantitative easing will never go away, because without it, interest rates would rise and this whole thing would unravel that much quicker. But at this point, it is getting at that point that you're mentioning, where it is all getting away from us so quickly because of the compounding interest, that we are getting to the end game, to the point where it isn't sustainable.
But isn't there a bit of a solution, just like in Greece? I mean, when whatever, the debt becomes unmanageable, that's fine, because there are bankers who would be glad to buy Yellowstone or whatever, Key West or something, whatever, and all the oil and gas of Alaska or something like that. In other words, isn't this, in a sense, something that the bankers actually want? They want the U.S. to go to broke so that, just like in Greece, they can buy everything for 10 cents on the dollar?
I don't know. It's impossible for me, or you plain or anybody to know that. I mean, that's an interesting theory, I guess. You could say the same thing about any creditor, any general creditor, the Chinese. I mean, we just got word today that the largest, they say, privately held corporation in China. There are no privately held corporations in China. That's kind of an oxymoron in its own right. But the largest privately held corporation in China bought the J.P. Morgan Chase building in Lower Manhattan for $750 million. That is part of the process of exchanging your dollar reserves for hard assets, gold, silver, anything, but real estate as well. So yeah, I understand what you're saying about converting your dollar reserves into, various hard assets. But at this point, there are not very many solutions left. And I'm afraid that even before any solutions are tried, the whole system is going to unwind. And the squeeze that is going to get put on, and I don't know if you have a global audience playing and along, but specifically here in the U.S., where we have exported our inflation for, quite literally 5 or 6 decades, all of that money is going to be coming home to roost now. And we are going to be caught in a period, if not hyperinflation, however you want to define that, of significant price inflation. And that is going to really impact the vast majority of Americans who are struggling to make it from paycheck to paycheck already. And that's a path that it's going to be really interesting to see where that takes us.
You mentioned China. Now, I think it was last week they actually warned the United States to get their house in order.
Yeah.
And many people say that the only reason the United States can carry on the way they have been is because China's backing them in some type of symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
How long do you think they're going to play that game?
Yeah, it's funny. Just this evening, I was reading a story. There's a guy by the name of Mike Snyder that runs a blog called the Economic Collapse blog. I just found it a couple of months ago. He gets picked up by Zero Hedge quite a bit. And there was something on there tonight about, excuse me, 9 clues that China is accelerating this path towards the next global financial system. And I agree. We've all sat back and thought, well, they've got to get, more yuan trade agreements, and they got to get the world a little more accustomed to trading in yuan or renminbi and all these different things. And what's really hard for me, and really I think for anybody to really get their arms around, is the fact that tomorrow is not going to be like yesterday, in that the only people that even remember a world where the US dollar was not the world's reserve currency, where the US was not a world superpower, where the US was not this, hegemonic beast in control of everything. I mean, you have to have been paying attention before World War II. So that makes you, let's see, you would have had to been born in the 20s, which would make you well into your 80s today. Everybody else walking the face of the planet, the only experience they have to base their expectations and where they think everything's going, the only experience they have to base that on is this world of U.S. hegemony. And so to get your arms around and to be able to predict and consider where we're going when you have, no basis really to understand where that might be based on your experiences of your life is really hard for people to get their arms around. And that's why I think it's really hard to predict. We don't know exactly how this whole process, this move into this next global currency regime and the next reserve currency or currencies, we don't know how that's going to go because nobody was really around the last time it happened. And so it makes it very, very, none of it that was around then is still around today, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so it makes it very hard to predict how it's all going to play out and what kind of timeline.
It sure seems that, I was just going to say, Plain, it seems like China and Russia have certainly been accumulating more than their fair share of gold.
No question about it. Yeah. And what's funny is the last update that China gave anybody about their gold reserves is now about 4 years old. And so when this gets printed by the World Gold Council or whatever, they show China with only a little over 1,000 metric tons. And that probably understates it by at least a power of 5 or 6 times, just by what we know they have imported, because that we can keep track of, because they do announce that. But then the stuff that they mine themselves that they don't export, same thing is true for Russia. Yes, let's just put it this way. Like I said, we don't know how this is going to play out because nobody has any past experience to base it on. Yeah. However, if the three of us were going to offer the world a new currency, it has to be competitive. You have to give people some value. You have to give people a reason to use your currency versus the current structure. Well, if you just rolled out another piece of paper, well, screw it. I'm just going to keep using this other piece of paper that everybody else uses. But if you rolled out a piece of paper that had at least a partial asset backing, well, hey, now we're talking about something here. So that's my guess, is that's the direction they're going to go.
Well, one of the things about that is a lot of the gold bugs and silver bugs, I guess myself included, have been assuming that China and Russia are just going to come in, gallop into the market and just start blasting the price of the precious metals up into the stratosphere. When you think about it, though, it would seem to me that a much more plausible strategy would be that they're going to come in, buy as much as they can without driving the price up for as long as they can.
Exactly. That's what anybody else would do. I mean, that would be the most sensible thing to do. And it gets back to the idea of one of you guys said earlier about the kind of symbiotic relationship between China and the U.S. Yeah, if you're sitting on $1 trillion worth of bonds, you don't just The only entities that just dump stuff in mass without concern for its effect on price are the bullion banks when they want to jam price lower at 3 a.m. That's the only time I ever see it. The idea of the Chinese unloading billions and billions of dollars of treasuries all at once, they're going to try to do that as gradually as possible, so as to not disrupt the market, as to leg themselves out of that position with as I guess as good of an execution over time as you can get. And so, yeah, we're already seeing it. Some of the latest data shows the only buyer of treasuries these days is the Fed. Every other country is a net seller. And so, yeah, they're moving in that direction. Again, the challenge will be figuring out that timeline. How long of a timeline they have. That was that article I was reading tonight. Is in fact maybe they're just deciding at this point we got to move a little quicker than what we thought. We'll see.
So the bullion banks, I mean, we've seen countless raids where they've come in, like you said, 3 o'clock in the morning and just dumped, ungodly amounts of contracts. Are they in cahoots with the government? Or are they with the Exchange Stabilization Fund? I mean, how are they getting away with this?
Yeah, it starts there. There. I wrote a thing this week. People can find it on my site. It was a public article about a book that came out about 12 years ago called Gold Wars. And it's a fantastic history of the desire of the Western central banks to manipulate and suppress the price of gold. Ever since the Bretton Woods Agreement, post-World War II monetary system, 65 years ago. And if you don't know that history, I mean, I think it's easy for people to think, these loons that talk about conspiracy theory, they're just all bent out of shape because gold's gone down for 2 years and they can't figure out why, so it must be a conspiracy theory. No, bull crud. That's not true. This has been going on for 65 years. And if you take time to learn the history, you'll see that this is actual conspiracy fact. It isn't conspiracy theory. And the reason the Western central banks desire to press the price of gold down is that it is a rising price of gold is indicative of a lack of confidence, a lack of faith in their current fiat currency, the paper money. And if gold is rising, if gold's going through the roof, it's a clear reflection that confidence in paper money is going down. The only thing that backs paper money is confidence, full faith, full credit. And so gold cannot be seen to be an alternative to their fiat money. And that is why the central banks, have wanted a lower gold price for over 65 years. The bullion banks are their agents. They are the ones that enact this for them. They're the ones that are in the market, taking the central bank gold that has been designated to be leased out and selling it into the market to suppress price and meet demand. That's how it works. It is the bullion banks taking their orders, working at the behest of the central banks. That's the mechanism.
And the whole time they're doing this, the Fed is creating massive inflation, right? Running the printing presses day and night. So
right now, yes.
Yeah, and I guess that creates a lot of confusion because one of the things I always see people arguing about is half the people say we're in a deflationary environment and the other half say we're in an inflationary environment. And I was just wondering where you stood on that debate.
Well, too many people that I think that enter that argument keep it too simple, as if you can just broadly generalize it's all inflation or it's all deflation. I think it's a lot more specific than that. Yes, you know what? I think they're printing like crazy, trying to protect against a massive deflation. If all the net worth is tied up in real estate and homes are suddenly worth half of what they used to be, that's a tremendous deflation. But if you're going to print money like crazy to try to reflate, and all of that money, it devalues the currency, which then is reflected in a rising cost of all these dollar-denominated assets like crude oil or a gallon of milk, well, then that's inflation within a broader deflation, at least to me. I mean, I don't mean to get all, subtle and esoteric and all that kind of stuff, but I think it's not complicated at all to have a tremendous inflation while other assets or asset classes are deflating. So I mean, that would be my answer to that. And I think that's what the battle still is. And I still, again, I'm my biggest concern is a return of all of the dollars that we've printed for the last, really since the gold window was closed in 1971. A return of all those dollars come back and start sloshing around the U.S. And it so devalues the currency that the cost of everyday living just goes beyond the means of the average American. And the civil unrest that could come from that, anyway, that might be a topic for later in this interview, but that's the main thing that I worry. That's the thing that keeps me up at night.
Well, Turd, there's a lot to chew over in what you've just been talking about. First of all, I'm normally in Asia, and so I can give you more of an Oriental perspective. First of all, I think that if you want to see the future of the post-dollar world, I think you can already see it forming in, let's say, Southeast Asia, because China is now their biggest trade partner.
Yep.
And even in a place like Thailand, if you go visit, you'll find a lot more Chinese tourists now than, let's say, European tourists or whatever. So now they tend to travel in groups and go to their own places, so they're not as visible as, if you walk around the backpacker hotel district or something. but you can already see that. And then along with that, when you're talking about inflation, I think what we've seen is a tremendous property inflation around the world, but not so much in the U.S. If you go again, whether it be Hong Kong or Thailand or Latin America, I think you will see massive misallocation of wealth in shopping centers and sky rises and all kinds of things. And you sit there and say, they just don't have the money here to justify that. And then, well, that's true, but there are a couple of other factors. One is the massive money laundering, right? You can't put money in a bank anymore easily, whereas you can just go build a shopping center or whatever with cash. So that's one of the big things. And you see that all over Latin America, but even, let's say, Hong Kong, where it's not so much drug money, it's more the corruption out of China. You can't walk into a bank with $1 billion anymore, cash. But you can go to a developer and say, build me 2 big, tall buildings. And so anyway, I'm just trying to say the disruption in the markets is huge around the world, and it's less so in the U.S. And I think that what this has done is, I think you can see this if you read the foreign media. The anger at the U.S. Fed policy is probably greater outside the U.S. than inside the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And
it seems that way.
And so that's why I think those who talk about the switch away from the dollar will take 15 years and so on and so forth, they may well be wrong, because the pain to other places is so great now.
And accelerating exponentially, like we talked about.
Yes. And so in a more normal environment, maybe it would take 15 years. But if you're, for the sake of the argument, if you're Thailand or you're Brazil, you're looking at, I don't know what to say, but it's kind of like you got a gun put to your head. And so I think there's a real incentive for them to work out these trade deals or barter deals or other things as quickly as possible. And that's the way I read the foreign press. I could be wrong, but as I say, I'm normally in Asia, and I can even, read other languages. And so I have some idea what's going on. And I think it's back in the States where the debate over inflation versus deflation is a little nastier. I mean, most people just say what you need is more expensive and what you don't need is less expensive.
Yeah.
That's a routine take on it. But anyway, so I'm just throwing in a few, opinions there. But I do think expect places like Asia, Southeast Asia, to really, really want to do non-dollar business. Because then there's the additional thing. This latest crap in D.C. is reminding people that the U.S. is not really reliable. I mean, that was the U.S.'s great strength for decades and decades, is no matter what you said about them, at the end of the day, you knew they were going to more or less come through.
Yeah, exactly. And that gets back to the argument to suppress gold. I mean, it's all about faith and confidence. And you're right. And it gets back to what we originally talked about now no longer having a debt ceiling that's denominated, in dollars, now denominated in time. Again, as this attempt to maintain confidence or at least not make it seem like it's so frequent and shattering of confidence, if you get my drift. And so,
Oh, exactly.
I agree. You're right. I think you're right on, Plain. I think it's coming a lot faster than we would have thought when I first started thinking about this stuff, 4 or 5 years ago. I remember talking to my father-in-law, who used to travel international all the time, and I said, well, I don't understand why the Chinese wouldn't want to have the privileges of a reserve currency, with 1.2 billion people or whatever it is. I mean, we've enjoyed the privileges of it for the last 60 years in growing our welfare state and everything else, trying to pacify all of our people. If you've got 4 times the people, why wouldn't you want to have the privileges of reserve currency yourself? And at the time he said, oh, they're so far away and blah, 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 and the corruption there and everything else. And much of that is still true. But nonetheless, I think the compounding issue and the acceleration of events is forcing their hand to move quicker. It certainly seems that way, at least.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thing, you mentioned Greece in there somewhere. I think one of the biggest stories that's going on right now is hardly reported in the English press. And that is, okay, so Greece, for different reasons, is in a total mess, right? We know that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, what you have there, I think you have in the U.S., you have 2 quote unquote mainstream parties, right? The liberal, conservative thing. And they're both just operatives for whoever's got the money and so on. And they're useless. And then there were a couple of challengers. And probably the biggest one was called the Golden Dawn, a right-wing, and in the view of some, neo-Nazi tendencies, although I think that's perhaps a bit harsh. But the real thing is they were telling the truth about a lot of things, and they were fighting the system, and they were gaining tremendous popularity. And then in the last couple of weeks, you've had what to me looks like a totally orchestrated takedown on bogus grounds of banning and arresting and so on the whole party. And so people out there listening, think about what we're talking about. If the Tea Party or the Occupy Wall Street types, start to really gain traction, we've just seen, essentially, in Greece, part of the EU, a case where they just say, we're throwing you all in jail. The head of the party, all of the guys in parliament, whatever. That's what they'll do. And so working within the system is not going to be so simple. Now, you can say, well, that's Greece. That will never happen in, let's say, France. Really? Do you really think that the 2-party dictatorships we have in the West will not defend to the death their privileges?
Absolutely.
And it's not even talked about in the English language papers. I mean, this is an amazing thing. In the EU, in the heart of Western democratic tradition in Greece, a party that, is polling 30, 40%, depending on the polls, they're now just making it illegal and putting them all in jail.
Yeah. I would, and it'll probably turn out to be it would be promotive of that party in the end, because by putting them in jail, they're probably making them more popular. Because
I think they are.
And if anything, because they're going to continue down the path that these other parties, that are in control, those parties are only going to get less popular, because what they're going to do isn't going to fix it. And so it's going to make these other guys seem even more attractive just by not doing anything. But you're right. That is, I don't think there's any question about it. We're already seeing it. I mean, there's a one-party system really in the United States now. And they're the status. They are the ruling class. They are the ones that by extension control the money and everything else. And there's and then there's the rest of us. And if you were the system is set up that there can't be a third party. They've electorally set it up to make it almost impossible for a third party candidate or third party group to get any traction. And if they did, you would first be demonized or made to look like some kind of goofball. And I'm not saying Ross Perot 20 years ago wasn't a goofball, but I mean, they'll get the Perot treatment, right? And
Yeah. I mean, well, come on. I mean, you can say somebody's a goofball, but come on. I mean, look at the main party candidates, their nominees, like
oh
McCain. Or, I mean,
God.
these guys, what is normal when you're talking about these guys?
Well, that's true, but they're all pretty much rowing in the same direction, and as long as you don't upset the apple cart, you're allowed to, do your thing. It's that if anybody that thinks that we can, and this is what is so frustrating and frightening at the same time, is to think that we can affect change within the current system and structure. Just not optimistic, plain. Not optimistic at all.
As far as upsetting the apple cart, Turd, what do you make of the games that are being played with the credit rating agencies? I think, was it a couple months ago, someone tried to downgrade the United States, and then they end up finding themselves in some legal.
The Standard & Poor's had the big public downgrading from AAA to AA plus in early August of 2011. And it took about 12 months or so, but they were finally formally investigated by the Department of Justice for how they rated credit default swaps and CDOs and other MBS, mortgage-backed securities, back in 2008. And I think they were fined, I don't even know how many dollars. Now, some would say you're being cynical to suggest there's some kind of a connection between the two. Well, let's see. Then let's look at Egan-Jones, which was the one rating firm that tried to operate independent of all the big ones. They were the ones that I think they still list a U.S. credit at A or A minus, down from AAA, and they have been vilified by the SEC and by FINRA and all these other government watchdog agency bureaus, whatever. This week, there was it Moody's or Fitch? One or the other. Dared to say that should this continue, they might actually consider thinking about maybe taking some action and lowering the credit rating. But then as soon as this agreement was reached, they were quick to come right out and say, no, now we think everything's fine. So yeah, there's no question about it. The credit ratings are part of the scam. They're afraid to say anything contrary.
It's like going up to the local mafia boss and telling him you don't like the rates he's charging to remove your garbage. Exactly. It's not an argument you're going to win.
No, exactly. And the hard part is, I think for regular people, is to get their arms around that. To understand just how corrupt everything is at so many levels.
What do you make of the bank problems? Zero Hedge has had things where people are saying, Chase, you can't wire internationally, and they're going to put limits on cash transactions and stuff. Since I'm normally out of the U.S. and most people I know are out of the U.S., it seems to me quite clear that it's becoming politically incorrect, both to have cash in the U.S., but also to essentially get assets out of the U.S. But they can't come out and say that because it would create a panic.
Yeah.
So it's not being done in a direct way. This is just my impression. No, I can't prove it, but I've just seen too many cases where what should be or used to be routine transactions are now really difficult to do, or you can't even do them.
Yeah, and this one in particular was a real eye-opener because it's a limit of wire transfers out of the country. And there's even appear to be some within the country. And, if you look in Cyprus in the days leading up to the Cyprus bail-in, those that knew what was going on were rapidly wiring their money out. So, apparently a lot of the Russian money got wind of this and got out of there before they could put capital freezes on and stop that from going on. And so when we see these things, these letters going out from Chase and apparently from Citi, and maybe soon it'll be all the big banks saying that, we're going to limit your ability to do this, it makes you wonder, why? There was some articles that then came out, some people trying to say, well, they're just trying to convince people to convert their accounts to a more heavily feed account so that they can charge higher fees, and that kind of stuff. And, on the surface, you think, well, that makes sense. But then, or at least I can see, some devious bank doing that, obviously. But it seems to be more than that. I've gotten a lot of different emails from a lot of different people over the last few days that, are just giving me their opinion, and some people that seem to be, kind of on the inside saying, no, there's something going on here, something to be concerned about. And, well, again, I wish I could speak specific to it, but that's just a,
Well,
Turd,
at the same time, let's be honest, it's not just that. It's you can look at the pressure around the world,
yeah,
right? An American will have a lot of trouble opening a bank account today around the world.
right.
Okay, if you don't live in a country, it is now becoming difficult to walk in with an American passport and open a bank account.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
even if you have references, no criminal records, you name it, right? I don't think you can in Panama. I mean, I think not only do you need a residence card, I think you need somebody as an introduction, a lawyer or whatever, right? So it's certainly impossible for a guy living in Florida to go there and do it. And so I think there's a broader trend here, and it's not a trend we're going to be happy with.
Right.
I think they're gradually locking the system down, or locking the country down.
That one of these emails I got today, a guy was saying that he had spoken to all he considered was a high-level contact of his. And this guy said that the article that he saw in Forbes magazine and what was put out by Chase was obviously written by the bank's lawyers, in his opinion. And he said, what do they mean by cash activity limit? Because I'll tell you what that means. That means whatever Chase wants it to mean, to stop you from getting your cash out when you desperately need to. And just thought that the whole thing was just completely transparently absurd what they were trying to do. Like we said, if this was all designed to force you into some higher fee paying account, just start charging fees on the existing accounts. I mean, no, there's something more nefarious at work here as part of a bigger thing, like you said, Plain. It is next to impossible. A friend of mine that a guy I consider a friend, lives down in Central America. His name is Jim Willie, who's an analyst with a newsletter. And he talks to me about that stuff, about it. It's next to impossible. Doing business into or interstate business from there. It all does seem to be kind of a gradual plan to lock things down.
In Canada here, I know they've just, I believe it was a few months ago, they introduced legislation that would basically allow the banks to pilfer saving accounts the same way they did in Cyprus.
Right.
And I know Jim Sinclair is sort of ringing the alarm bells, saying this is going to happen here. It's only a matter of time.
Right. Well, and here's the thing, that the banks, again, this is how I see it. I could be dead wrong. I mean, I'm just this guy that's just been paying attention for the last 4 or 5 years. But the too big to fail banks are technically insolvent and underwater, because they have all of these bonds from 2006, 2007, 2008 that are worthless. If you marked them to market, what are they worth today? They are worth pennies on the dollar, if that. And therefore, with all of the leverage, they're technically insolvent. But because of political pressure back in late 2008 and 2009, the Financial Accounting Standards Board changed the accounting rules to allow these banks to instead value those bonds at maturity, which means, and anybody that has ever bought even a municipal bond knows that you buy it at par, $1,000 a bond. It might trade up in value or down in value, but when it matures, you get your $1,000 back. And so these banks are carrying all of these worthless bonds, these mortgage-backed securities on their books at par, because when they mature in 2038 or 2037, they'll theoretically mature back at par. That's the only way these banks, whether it's Chase Manhattan or Citi, who's in really bad shape, or Morgan Stanley, or any of the big Bank of America, it's the only way that they even have the appearance of still being functional entities. I mean, in a large part, they're just zombies. But if it wasn't for that accounting rule, they'd all be broke. So this idea that in the end, they're all setting up for a bail-in to confiscate assets, that's not baseless. I mean, that is a plausible thing if, as I just laid out, these banks are all insolvent in the first place. So
what do we do, Turd? Do we take the tax hit, take our money out of the system to the extent that we can?
that's what Jim Sinclair is telling you. I mean, that when he tells you get out of the system, GOTS, that's what he's worried about. And I mean, believe me, his contacts are, and he's a hell of a lot, he's a lot better than mine. He's a lot smarter than me. So he knows a lot more about this than I do. So I'm, who am I to question him? I mean, he must have his rationale for what does he have to gain personally by running around and putting all these meetings on all over the planet to warn people? I think you need to be prepared for that eventuality, that you wake up one day and the banks are closed. I'm going to kind of go off in a different direction just real quick, but that's the thing about sound money. Everything now is digitized. What 3% of the money supply is actually in currency and in coin, right? Everything else is just a series of zeros and ones on a computer at your bank, on a server someplace. And so it's very easy for it to just be, ledgered off in another direction, or getting back to being a political enemy of the state. If the state decides that you need to be punished or you need to be silenced or be made an enemy of, and you've got all your life savings in some government run account, all of a sudden, poof, gone. That gets back to this libertarian, freedom loving sense of sound money. And that if your wealth is in your assets, be it silver or gold, well, yeah, okay, sure, they could come, jackbooted guys could kick your door in and take you away anyway. And I hope the three of us share that train to North Dakota together, guys. You seem like nice guys. But
it's a little cold there. I'm hoping they're kinder and let us, get a little further south.
This time of year is beautiful, but yeah, but anyway, that could vary. I think that is a rational fear, and it's something that it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's something you got to be aware of as a possibility.
Turd, if there's a bail-in in the banks, there might be a bail-in with all the paper gold too.
Oh, sure, certainly.
Even something like even Perth certificates. I mean, because after all, the bail-in is a political thing. It's a, the bankers, feel that they run and own everything and they can do what they want. And so if somebody's going to take a hit, it's not going to be them.
Hey, right? I don't mean to interrupt you, Plain, but on that, I just want to I don't want to forget about the Perth gold that you said. Look, we already had that with MF Global. I mean, look, there were thousands of people that had certificates, for 5,000 ounces of silver or 100 ounces of gold. They just poof, gone.
I know, it's criminal. And so what I'm trying to say, though, is it's getting harder and harder to imagine where to put stuff that seems safe.
Right.
I mean, obviously, yes, if you have your yard and you get an old clunker car and you dig a hole under it and, put some coins there, that's going to be more or less safe. But still, I mean, push comes to shove, they're making it very difficult. First of all, almost all of us need operating capital, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you need like 6 months of cash lying around no matter what, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's some form that you can quickly get to. And there's nowhere you can put that's really safe. I mean, they may switch currencies. I mean, by that I mean make the old banknotes have to be redeemed.
Yes.
That's entirely possible too. I mean, I haven't heard much talk about that in places like Zero Hedge, but if they do some big bail-in, they may at the same time kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone and say, hey, the old banknotes are going to be no good in 4 months.
Yeah.
And if you think it can't happen to euro, when it came in, the old stuff became unusable. I mean, you had whatever it was, 6 months or something.
And you'd like to think that type of transition would be at least somewhat orderly. You'd like to think that all of us that are at least putting some money in physical gold and silver, that that one day that's just a store of your wealth, and one day you can transition it back into whatever the new currency regime is. It'd be nice. I mean, we're hoping that it's orderly and civilized. But yeah, I think the concern is like what you said. I mean, you can't. Okay, so I've got all these ounces and ounces and ounces of gold, and I've gotten completely out of the system, and I've taken all my wealth and converted in physical metal. Well, then what? What good is that going to do me if society completely breaks down? That's what we hope in the end doesn't happen, because your ammo is going to be more valuable than your gold at that point.
Well, that's an investment strategy. Lots of people think 22 is the way to go, not 995 or whatever.
I just, I think just to stress that this is all kind of stuff that people need to be thinking about. At the end of the day, though, the main thing is people need to be thinking about this stuff. That's all. When nobody's going to have the answer, and no one's going to be able to predict with 100% certainty about how this is all going to play out over the next 3 months and 3 years and 10 years. But people need to be at least thinking and preparing so that you're just not caught flat-footed. The military term is situational awareness. And that is that as you enter as you get on the airplane, you recognize where the exits are. As you enter the crowded theater, you know where the exit signs are, so that when everybody else is panicking, at least you've mentally prepared so that you can save yourself from during those moments of panic. And that's what we're talking about here, that you've at least expanded your situational awareness. So at least you know where the exits are. You have a plan, because we don't know how it's going to all play out, but we just know that definitely changes are coming. Inevitable.
Yeah, I think a mature way to approach precious metals is the way Richard Russell does, who basically just says your precious metals aren't made to be traded. It's an insurance policy.
Yeah. I get asked all the time, Oolong, about how much should I have? And usually my answer is, well, you don't have enough. If you're asking me if you have enough, you probably don't have enough. But that's just kind of as an aside. As a general rule of thumb, if you just wanted to look at it straight as insurance, do your homework, do your math, and come up with what you think the price of gold should be. What would be, once all this fractional reserve bullion banking and all the conspiracies and all the Chinese stuff comes out, we have a new currency, whatever. What do you think an ounce of gold should be valued at? Some people value it just as simply as saying, well, I know how much the U.S. says they have, and I know how much the money supply is, and if I divide one into the other, I get $8,000 an ounce. Let's just use that as a number. Okay, $8,000 an ounce. All right, that means we're going to go up, let's call it 5 times in price from here. All right, well, if gold's going to go up 5 times, then I want to have 20% of my wealth in gold, so that if everything else goes to zero, the 20% I have in gold goes up 5 times, and I got my money protected. That's probably the easiest, most base rule of thumb that I give people as to how much gold they should have. Again, it goes along with what Mr. Russell says about how it's an insurance policy.
Yeah, and I mean, if the stink hits the fan, everything's going to skyrocket. A loaf of bread's going to cost, the equivalent of $10 or $20, right? So yes, your gold will theoretically be worth more in dollar terms, but everything you probably need to survive is also going to be costing more in dollar terms.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Well, there's also the question of whether this is kind of just part of the slip into kind of neo-feudalism, and so, I mean, if you read about gold, a lot of people talk about, well, an ounce of gold is what will buy a good man's suit, right? Right. And that's what you could buy in Roman times or 400 years ago or 100 years ago. Well, how many slaves could you buy with an ounce of gold? Because slavery might be, serfdom may be coming back, where, people sign away 10 years of hard labor in exchange for, a place to sleep or whatever. And I don't mean to be so nasty about it, but a lot of these calculations, like if you divide the money supply and all that, are really, in my mind, very, very theoretical. I mean, even defining the money supply now is hard. And you got all these derivatives, and you've got the question of really who's got the political power at the end of the day to get the bail-in, and who's on the receiving end of the bail-in and who's on the paying end of the bail-in, right? These are power discussions, not just like theoretically. And then I don't know your take on it, but usually being in Japan, I'm pretty familiar with the whole question of the plundering of Asia and the whole Yamashita's gold and that whole program. And I really do think that the Japanese managed to steal, in today's terms, certainly well over $1 trillion of precious metals and jewelry and art and things like that. And a lot of that's still essentially hidden away. So even just calculating how much gold the richest family in China has, I mean, who knows? I mean,
Right.
there's just no way of knowing that. So I think these are kind of theoretical. What's much more relevant is like 6 months of food, 6 months of barter material, 6 months, that kind of thing. And in recent crises, sometimes it's like toilet paper and cigarettes were the real, winning investments.
The real necessities.
Don't forget prostitution. That's going to skyrocket as well.
Well, that's true. That's true. But hey, Turd, thinking about this going forward in the U.S., I mean, this is like an investment strategy. What about you personally? Okay, I mean, your friend Jim Willie's down in Costa Rica or whatever. I mean, do you think about, for example, leaving the States? I mean, what are your thoughts going forward with the way things are going?
I've thought about it. I've given it thought and decided that that's not a path that I'm going to take. If anything, I've got 2 kids that are one in high school and one in middle school, and so they're entrenched here in the U.S. and going to high school and stuff like that. And so I'm not going to uproot them. And frankly, I wouldn't even know where to go. I remember having a discussion 10 years ago about going to New Zealand. But I don't even think let anybody in these days. I wouldn't even know where to start. And so instead, without making it sound like I'm some kind of Thomas Paine type individual or something, I'm going to stay here and fight. And again, not trying to make that sound like I'm some kind of glamorous or heroic, but if the black sedans ever wanted to pull up in front of my house, I'm confident at this point in my life that they know where I live. So I've already put myself out there to stand up, stay here and fight. So I'm going to continue to do it. And again, at the end of the day, I wouldn't know where do you go? I mean, that's probably a better question. Maybe you move to Russia yourself. You'd be like Jim Rogers. Where's he? He just
he's in Singapore.
Singapore. Yeah. Because he figures that's where the 21st century will be. Will be based in Asia and Southeast Asia. That's probably as logical as any place else as to where to go. I wouldn't really know where to start outside of that.
Well, that's a reasonable bet, but that's in terms of a moving kind of. I mean, there are a lot of elements to this. There's like, do you want to try to get some of your assets out of the country? They can have all these banking things, but you can still buy property anywhere, right? I mean, you could buy property in New Zealand or Singapore for that matter. And Singapore is definitely a hot place. A lot of the expats in Hong Kong have moved there.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more liberal than it used to be. I mean, if you went there 20, 30 years ago, you might have said this is really dull. Right? It's not nearly so dull now. It's a much more exciting place than it used to be.
I think Turd would end up getting caned for for someone's bench.
That's what I'm thinking about with that kid from 20, 30 years ago too. But and I've never been to Singapore, but it strikes me as almost a pseudo Orwellian type state, in that they have this security apparatus and structure that as long as you're not breaking the law. It's like the people here in the U.S. say, what do I have to worry about the NSA? I'm not doing anything wrong. As long as you're, not doing anything wrong, you're not going to get caned. But it's not necessarily free either, and it's like, isn't there an Orwell quote that is something like, none is more hopelessly enslaved than those that think that they're free? That's an Orwell quote, isn't it?
I thought it was Goethe, but anyway.
Maybe he was quoting him. You never know.
Well, no,
but you
for
know what I'm
sure, for
saying?
sure. I'm not saying that Singapore is such a great choice. I'm just saying that it's much, much freer than it used to be, and certainly the
Yeah,
West is far less free than it used to be. So
yeah. Oh,
you have to
absolutely.
put that in your calculations. But it wasn't simply a question of leaving the country like New Zealand or Costa Rica. It was also a question of, excuse me, do you think of things like investing in agricultural land elsewhere? What are some of your thoughts? I mean, do you like to have everything right around you and protect it, or are you kind of thinking that you want to diversify by doing things like, well, buying
I
agricultural land somewhere?
I don't have any land now, other than the land that my home is sitting on.
Hmm.
However, that is part of the Ferguson game plan. In the end, we talked about, what do you do with all of this metal when it appreciates, gets reset multiples higher and appreciates, rapidly as this currency regime changes or after it's changed. Yeah, I anticipate, kind of like what the Chinese are doing with their dollars, I anticipate exchanging some of my metal for hard assets like land and other things that'll kind of make the family and make my individual situation more secure once all of this excrement has passed through the fan to the other side. So yeah, I don't have any land now, but that's how I see things going. Absolutely.
Well, it just seems like a reasonable approach. I mean,
Yeah.
one criticism of hard metal types is some are a little bit so focused on that you know you, it's just like there are people who survival types who are too focused on buying more gear.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
They can't even use the gear they got. They don't even know
Right.
how to use some of the gear they
Right.
got, and they're buying magazines on which new gear to get,
No,
right?
I see it as a transition. I don't mean to interrupt you, Blaine. I'm sorry, but
No, go ahead.
I see it as a transitory investment in a way, as a store of wealth, as this insurance, where I can take the wealth that I've accumulated in paper money, transition it into the metal, gold and silver, and then as they are revalued to a level that reflects true supply and demand and value in this new global currency regime, again, with fingers crossed that we actually make this transition in some kind of peaceful and civilized manner. My hope then is to then transition back out of metal into whatever this new accepted currency is, and then, additional other hard assets that I can buy, because it's kind of a dirty word sometimes to think of it this way because we're talking about insurance, but I will have profited because, I mean, we're talking about buying an ounce of gold for $1,300 that I think a fair value when it's all said and done is going to be well into the five figures as you convert it, in dollar value. I mean, that's a pretty healthy profit. So you might as well benefit from it too. I mean, maybe I'll buy 10,000 acres rather than 100.
Well, it's an open question, though. I mean, we just don't know because uh, a lot of people are thinking there's going to be a huge food crisis. I mean, we just can't. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
But for sure, I mean, the idea, like Oolong was saying earlier, it's an insurance policy, and that's why people need to think about it. It's just like you want to have insurance for other things, health insurance, car insurance, whatever. Um, I'm just amazed at how few people own precious metals in the
Right.
U.S.
Right.
I mean, the idea. I mean, what percentage do you reckon it is?
Okay. Maybe 1/10 of 1%. I mean, it's very small. It's very small. An actual physical gold. There might be people that think they own gold because they own an ETF or something like that. But people like me, or maybe like you guys, that have ounces of gold in a safe somewhere or in a safe deposit box, that's. I mean, I'll break one out every once in a while when we have people over and say, "Hey, look at this. You ever held an ounce of gold before?" And I mean, people just flock to me because they've never even seen it before. Wow, that's heavy. I wouldn't have expected to be that heavy. That kind
Have
of
you ever
stuff.
seen the video by Mark Dice?
I was just going to bring that up.
Oh, were you? Where he offers to sell an ounce of gold.
Yeah.
Or give it. No, what was it? He's going to give it away if they can guess the price, give or take $100 or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they can't, and they probably don't even know what country it's from. You show them a Canadian maple leaf, and it's like they wouldn't know. Is that like ancient British coin?
Yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't have a clue. So I for sure, but that's in a sense frightening, because that means that so few people recognize the value or whatever.
Right.
It doesn't make you feel like you've got the numbers that you want. You know what I mean? I would feel a lot happier if, let's say, 5% had precious metals. I would think that, you know what I mean? It just makes you feel like you're not just out there on a small minority.
But it doesn't make me question my absolute confidence of where this is all going, because so few people see it. It makes me more concerned that it's not going to go peacefully and civilized, because
that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, because nobody's paying attention, and it's just going to. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody's paying attention, but I think most people, they might sense, that something's not right, or they were paying attention this week and saw this budget stuff and went, things are really screwed up. But most people don't have the time, the understanding, the inclination to understand just how desperate the situation is, and the change that is coming over the horizon, and they just are unwilling or unable to see it. And then I wish more people own gold, because it would lead me to think I'd feel more confident that we're going to see our way through this to the end. I'm just afraid so many millions of people are going to be caught by surprise that it's just completely unpredictable. And I'm afraid it's not going to go well, that society's not going to stick together very well.
Well, that was the problem with the collapse in Eastern Europe, is it needed to be done in a less cold turkey kind of way. I mean, you know what I mean? If people are getting a pension and it gets cut off or whatever, you know what I mean? If the food distribution system gets shut down, I mean, even if you have money and you have a productive source of income or whatever, I mean, you know what I mean? Look at the U.S. today. It's far less reliable than what Eastern Europe had.
Sure.
I mean, if the banking system went down, how could your local grocer or whoever get supplies?
Exactly. And there was somebody to save them. I mean, as bad as East Germany was, and the cold turkey route that they had to go, and the years, almost at least a full decade, I shouldn't even say that. I mean, it's still, you get into Eastern Germany, you still know you're in East Germany. But at least they had the assets and the generosity of West Germany, trying to unify and reunify. And you had all of Western Europe, and you had the U.S. helping out and all that. Well, when this happens in the U.S., who's going to come help us? Martians? I mean, there's
well, I hear
the
Chinese want to help.
Yeah, they'll help. Yeah, they'll help, I'm sure. And so that's where.
And I think Mexico has a claim on. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
The Reconquista.
Yeah.
But well, that's the question. That's the question, and that's in the end. That's what we're talking about. Is we're trying to say people ought to protect themselves. And that's the real point, I guess, of your work, really, in a sense, isn't it? I mean, that's how you got into it, and that's why you're continuing, really, right?
Right. And I wish I could say, the only thing I can say with certainty, I am 100% confident and certain, for what it's worth, that this is all coming. This is all going to happen, and it seems to be coming even at a more rapid pace than what I had thought a year or two ago. That's the only thing I can say with certainty. What I can't say with certainty is, exactly what's going to play out, and nobody can. And all you can do, anybody listening, is to try to prepare the best you can, whether that's converting some of your dollar assets into hard assets like gold, silver, real estate, whatever, stocking up, always having at least a couple of weeks of food and water in your house, so that if you ever have to even just shelter in place, as they say, that you can. I mean, it's irresponsible not to have made preparations like that. I mean, people need to be thinking about this stuff, because it is definitely coming. And that's That's the mission of TF Metals Report. That's what we try to accomplish there, is try to get people thinking and preparing.
Well, thanks much, Turd. I think that's a good point to end it on. That's really the message we want to get out. So you want to say your website again? It's
yes, TF, again, the letters TF for Turd Ferguson, and he put it all together, TF Metals Report, METALS report.com. And there's a subscription component if you want some extra services, but the site itself is just free, and it's populated with a bunch of great people that provide all sorts of terrific information. And I don't think there's really any place else like it. So I encourage people to come check it out.
Oh, and Turd, before you go, could you please give Blythe Masters a call? She's really going crazy.
Yeah, my wife gets so mad. She still calls the house. And my wife, the last time she picked it up, said, "Listen, you witch, leave my husband alone. He doesn't want anything to do with you." And she can't seem to get it through her head. Yeah, I'll do what I can. I'll do what I can alone.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Turd. We appreciate your time, and thanks everyone for coming along. That's it for this week. Take care, and see you all later.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks, Turd. We appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Hey, my pleasure. Yeah, and again, I apologize for asking to wrap, but I do know my wife and kids are looking for me upstairs. And,
no problem. And you got that, whatever that drink was that I didn't catch.
It is a Jameson Gold, is Irish whiskey, and where I live in Kansas, and it is it's what is today, the 18th of October, and it's like 35 degrees outside. So
I'll tell you, hey, Turd, I'll tell you, here in Tokyo, it's freezing today. And what's funny is 10 days ago, there was like 3 days in a row where it was 95 degrees.
And you had that glancing blow of that hurricane. How'd that you come through okay?
It was fine here, and afterwards, it was like the cleanest air I'd seen in 20 years.
They blew it all to Europe.
And it was like cleaner than the air you see in South America or something, or New Zealand. So it was pretty darn clean. The thing is, I don't know how much damage was done to Fukushima, because Fukushima is totally screwed and getting worse. And the whole thing is one big lie. They talk about, what if spent fuel pool number 4 goes? And it's like, yeah, but if you look at the U.S. government documents they've released, they thought it already went the first day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we don't even know what the hell's going on, really. But yeah, it's bad news. I try to spend a fair bit of time outside of this area because of the radiation.
I believe it. Are there any studies over there about? I mean, is anybody releasing? I'm sure they're probably doing studies. Are they releasing the studies of the health effects so far in 2.5 years? I mean, does anybody know?
Well, I mean.
It's a complicated subject.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, the political pressure is so overwhelming. It's like talking about the Kennedy assassination in D.C. in 1965 or something. It's like after 500 had been killed, your enthusiasm kind of goes down a notch or two, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just saying the answer is it's grim, but I don't think it's. I mean, I think it will over time kill millions of people.
Right.
But that's a statistical thing, That means you would have lived 20 years and you only lived 10. You know what I mean? These are statistical things, and a lot of that damage is going to happen to places like Seattle or Vancouver. It happens with the rainfall. That's where I think it really gets people the worst.
I've already seen one study, and I'm sitting here thinking while you were talking, I can't remember what it was, but it was already just in the last 2 years, more than doubling of hyperthyroidism in infants on the West Coast.
Yes, and I can tell you in the Tokyo area that thyroid problems are very routine now. And I mean, look, it's a big deal, but I'm just trying to say that they'll be able to cover it up because everything will double. In other words, heart problems, leukemia, what I mean, all kinds of things, and it'll never be said to be caused by radiation.
Right.
And anyway, that's my guess. But even if you're in Kansas, one of the sites in the U.S. that's been like testing food and such and testing rainwater and whatever is a guy in St. Louis. And the numbers there frequently are actually very damn bad, but it's hit and miss. It depends on the jet stream and then the food.
Yeah.
Where is it coming? Well, here's the thing. Do you like stuff that accumulates, like cheese or beef? You know, it accumulates from the grass or whatever.
Yeah.
In other words,
Yeah.
like broccoli,
Yep.
it's not so bad, but cheese, it's going to be a lot worse, or beef. So it kind of depends.
That makes sense.
Look, it's not meant to panic anybody. I'm just saying, look, we're being poisoned in a lot of ways, and we all have a tough fight. But anyway, yeah, so it's colder than hell here today all of a sudden, which is really weird. And the weather is so bad, it's also causing food prices to really skyrocket, probably in your neck of the woods too. But I tell you what, Turd, you got that gold stuff waiting for you, and other kids and stuff.
It's still Friday night here.
So yeah, you still got Friday night to play with. So we better let you go. But thanks again, we do appreciate it.
Thanks, Turd.
Guys, it was my pleasure. It was fun.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks.